All right, so we're going to go through the label now. Brand name, I've already kind of talked to you about how I don't find that all that useful. What I look for are these active ingredient statements. It'll be on the front of the label in general. That's one point I forgot to make. So on these bottles, the front part is the label, the back part is the label, and all this stuff that's in the manual is the legal label on this product. So if in the back part, in this manual, it tells you the rate that you can apply it, and you apply at twice that rate and you kill your neighbor's tree, you can be liable for applying that chemical off-label, right? So it's not just what you see on the front and the back, it's everything in the manual that you're responsible for. So, you know, we really do have to take it serious when we use chemicals and do it right. All right, so active ingredient statements will look like this. They'll have an active ingredient and then an inert ingredient, and you want to pay attention to these common names in the active ingredients.
Are those chemicals with glyphosate?
Glyphosate.
Are they harmful to animals?
If they are harmful to animals, it will have a, on the label, it will have, I'm trying to think of the correct term now for it. There is an entry interval, and it'll tell you how long you have to wait before you let animals back into the area that you've sprayed. Or, well, for pets, it's when it's dry. For if you have anything that eats the plant material, it can be anywhere from a couple hours to a couple of weeks, depending on the chemical you use. So, yep. So the common names, there's not all that many of them. We talked about 2,4-D and dicamba already. There's some other common ones, carbaryl, imidacloprid, glyphosate, 2,4-D. These are the ones that you want to start looking at. And like I said, when you go to the store and you see all those different products, just start looking at the active ingredient and you'll realize, wait a second, there's really only 4 or 5 products up here, not 30 products up here. So, you know, you don't have to memorize too many of these active ingredients. And you can go online and see what these active ingredients will control and how they control things. So, this is one that you don't necessarily have to deal with unless you're a licensed pesticide applier. Then you can't buy these restricted use pesticides. But where people get in trouble is that all of you have cousins, brothers, aunts, uncles that have a farm around here somewhere, and you'll tell them about a nasty weed that you can't get rid of in your lawn, and they'll say, oh, I've got a chemical that will take care of that. Well, sometimes that's a restricted use chemical, and if you apply it, then, you know, you can get into some trouble there. So, you know, don't take restricted use chemicals or any chemical out of the original container, and pay attention to this label if you see it. So,
you have to have a license in Utah.
Yeah, you have to have a license to buy it, but you don't have a license to get it. Have to have a license to get it from your brother, or yeah. So that's the deal. And the reason that they're restricted is it can be extremely toxic to you as a human. It can also be that they're extremely hard on the environment. So an example, and one that a lot of homeowners get from their farmer friends, is Toradon. Toradon works pretty dang good on a lot of weeds, but Toradon is a restricted use chemical because it has a lot of soil activity and a lot of soil life and residual, and so it's fairly harmful to the environment. So unless you're applying it right, keeping it out of waterways and that kind of stuff, you have to be careful with Toradon. Another thing you want to find on the label, it's right below the active ingredient statement, is this EPA registration number. It's important for you to know for one reason. That is, if you're out spraying and you get sick and you need to go to the doctor for treatment, you can either take the container or rip off the label, or whatever you do, take that EPA registration number to them, and the medical staff can pull up all the information they need to know how to treat you based on that EPA registration number. So that's, you know, a really handy thing for you to have if you get sick while you're spraying. And now we'll get to the most important thing to look for on the label, and that's these signal words. there's 4 different types of signal words. It'll either be danger, poison, danger, warning, or caution. And that signifies to you how toxic this substance is to you. And we'll talk about it in general, and then at the end I'm going to tell you exactly, how much it takes to be lethal to you, depending on the signal word that we're using. So danger poison is highly toxic by any route of entry. It'll always have the skull and crossbones associated with it, and it's hazardous stuff. You want to really pay attention if you're using a danger poison chemical. That's what it looks like on the label. I'm going to flip through these labels pretty quick. I have them in the slides so you can look at them. If the signal word says danger, it is dangerous to you in terms of eye or skin contact. It's not necessarily highly toxic if inhaled or swallowed. So you can drink it. That's fine. Just don't get it in your eyes or on your skin. Probably not drinking it either, right? That's not a good thing. But it's most dangerous to you in your eyes and your skin. This brings up another good point. A lot of times we're really used to using the same chemical. So, you might use a 2,4-D product all the time. And most 2,4-D labels will either have warning or caution on them, depending on their mix. But there is a variety of 2,4-D that has a danger on the label. It's the amine variety. So you can't just assume that since you've been used to using that chemical that it will have the same signal word on it. You have to look at the label to make sure how toxic it is to you, depending on the formulation that you're using. So warning and caution. Warning is moderately toxic if inhaled or swallowed. Caution is slightly toxic if inhaled or swallowed. And like I said, I'm not going to go through these labels. So in general, if we can choose a chemical that's fairly low in toxicity and fairly good in terms of its activity on our plants, why not do that versus buying a skull and crossbones danger poison chemical? We can really help ourselves by choosing the right toxicity. So the next thing is this: protective clothing and equipment. Let's see. So this statement will tell you the minimum you need. Okay? It's not necessarily what you should wear, but it's the minimum you have to wear if you are applying it. It will always say long sleeve shirt, long pants, no open-toed shoes. So don't take your flip-flops or your sandals out and spray, right? Wear closed-toed shoes and a hat. It usually tells you to wear a hat. So it doesn't always say gloves, but I consider gloves a mandatory thing when I'm spraying. No matter what product I'm using, I spray with gloves. The thing about this protective equipment is it's really inexpensive. So you can buy these gloves. These are nitrile gloves. They're chemical resistant. You can buy them for $10 for 40 or so. It's a cheap investment for your own protection. Now, you want to use nitrile. Now, a lot of times ladies won't admit this in class, but I know because I've seen you out there doing it. You'll use your yellow gloves that you use to wash dishes with, and after you're done washing dishes with them, I don't say you take them back in and wash dishes, but after they're sort of worn out for dishwashing, you'll take them out and use those for your gloves that you spray with. So those yellow latex gloves actually readily absorb chemical. They have fairly large pores on them. They readily absorb the chemical, and then it just sits there on your hand the whole time you're spraying and using it. So it's worse than not having gloves on if you wear those. Nitrile, N-I-T-R-I-L. Yeah, they're usually green, or they'll be, they'll have like a little green sleeve on it with a different color, but usually it's green to signify the chemical resistance. Yeah, it's worse than not wearing gloves because they soak up the chemical and then keep it bound there right on your hand, and so it's worse than not wearing gloves at all.
What about medical gloves?
So the medical gloves break down really easy, and so that's why you can get nitrile medical gloves too, but they're really thin, they break down really easy, and these are just cheap enough. I figure, why not get these? These, I get these at, well, there's only one store in Evanston to buy stuff at, that's Walmart. So, I get them at Walmart.
In the garden area?
Yeah, in the garden area. I've seen them in Lowe's, Home Depot, Walmart, IFA, Murdoch. I mean, they're readily available, or you can get them online too. So.
Is the color a guarantee?
The color is not necessarily a guarantee, but at least, if you see green, you can just look on the package and make sure it's nitrile, and it's usually the right thing. So I always wear gloves. The other thing is when you're mixing, a lot of times, whether you're mixing and you're pouring a little chemical in, or you put your hose in and you're pouring, a lot of times you'll get a splashback when you're mixing. So wearing some eye protection when you're mixing is really important. Now I know none of you really like to wear this kind of eye protection out there, and have your neighbor watching you going, what the heck are they putting on their lawn? So at least get some good wraparound safety glasses. You can even get the Weed and Pest districts in Wyoming hand out these to all their employees because they can't get their 18-year-old kids to wear these all summer long, but they can get them to wear these all summer long. So, depending on what you're doing, but use some eye protection, especially when you're mixing, so you don't get some splashback and those kind of things. If the PPE statement here tells you to get a respirator, I get a professional to do the spraying for you. So there's no reason as homeowners that you need to use any product that requires you to use a respirator, right? So. But some products do.
What about boots? I usually wear rubber boots rather than getting it on your leather shoes.
Right. So leather shoes absorbs chemical readily too. And so it's really best, if you can, to have a separate pair of rubber boots that you just keep with your spray stuff. So I keep a separate pair of, you buy them for $10 or $15, the little thigh-high rubber boots. They're cheap, easy to slip on and off. And I do it for a couple of reasons. One, then I know it's not getting on my shoes and staying there and I'm absorbing it. The other reason is it's usually really nice in the morning when you get out and spray. And after you're done spraying, you think, I ought to go check the garden. And so if you've got your shoes on that you just sprayed and then you walk through your garden, you're getting chemical in your garden and you're either damaging the plants or, adding residue to your plants. So that's why I keep a separate pair to spray with. The other thing people will ask me in terms of this clothing deal, if you're out spraying and you get a bunch of chemical on your clothes, when you wash them separately from your other clothes and then do a rinse cycle in your washer afterwards to rinse out your washer, and then actually line dry them instead of on the dryer for two reasons. One, you can get residue in your dryer, for other batches of clothes, but also sunlight does a really good job of breaking down chemical, and so if you line dry them out in the sunlight, that's a lot better for them. So that's if you spill or get a bunch of chemical on your clothes, you can do that. So all right, there's a practical treatment statement on the label. Tells you what to do if you get it in your eyes or get it on your skin, or it just gives you practical treatment that's on the label. We've already talked about this storage and disposal, but it'll be on the label too. So the other thing we have to keep in mind is the hazard to you is really the toxicity times exposure. So if you can wear some protective equipment and really reduce your hazard by limiting your exposure, that's a really good thing to do. And if you can buy toxicity chemicals with warning or caution on the label instead of danger or danger poison on the label, that's also a way to reduce the hazard to you. So 97% of all body exposure to chemicals is through the skin, and we absorb chemicals at different rates. So, the palm, the forearm, that's not too bad in terms of absorption rate, but it's there, so wearing gloves can be helpful. One thing to think about when you're wearing your gloves, how many of you have ever had your gloves on like this, and you've been out spraying, and your cell phone rings? So what do? You go like this. You put your gloves under your armpit like that, take them off, and then grab your cell phone and answer it. So if you look up there at the armpit, it absorbs chemical quite readily, right? So that's not actually such a good idea to do. So we got to really think about what the things we do with our hands when we're spraying. So another thing that I do all the time in the summer, especially when it's hot, that I have to really concentrate on when I'm out spraying, is I'll take my hat, take it off, wipe the back of my hand to my brow, put my hat back on. You know, if I've done that and I have a bunch of chemical on my hand, I've just sealed it in there nice and tight with my hat band and have it sitting on my forehead, right, which absorbs chemical fairly decently. So I was at a training several years ago where a lady did this training, and what she did is she put a chemical dye on her hand. And as we came into the room, she went and shook all of our hands and introduced ourselves. We just thought she was a great presenter, right? You know, a real friendly presenter, introducing herself, being great. So we got to this part of the lesson, and she asked for a volunteer, and a man came up, and she had a black light that she turned on, and the chemical that she had on her hand started to fluoresce. So she showed it on his head, and he had the chemical all over his nose, his ears, his mouth. You know, he had done all kinds of stuff with his hands, right, in that class. So she got down to his belt buckle with the black light, and she said, "Do you want me to go any further?" And he says, "No, ma'am, please don't." So you got to be careful when you're out there spraying and pay attention to what you're doing so that you're not getting chemical on your body all over. So what did I do with my slide advancer now? Lost it. There we go. All right. Another thing you can do to help yourself is choose different formulations. So dry-based or granular is the least absorptive. Water-based, which is what we get mostly, is sort of in the middle. And then the emulsifiable concentrates, those are an oil-based carrier. And so if you get those on your skin, it's really tough to get it off. It really absorbs quite rapidly. So if you can stay away from those emulsifiable concentrates, you'll be a lot better off in your choices of chemicals. So one thing that's important to understand is those signal words are only tied to acute effects. Acute effects are something that happens within 24 hours of you spraying. It's a one-time deal, and that's what those signal words are about in terms of their toxicity. They don't have to take into account things like chronic effects and delayed effects. That is not on the label. It doesn't say, you know, danger poison because there's a potential for chronic effects. So that's why I recommend at least wearing gloves and really protecting yourself. You know, people ask me, you mean you wear gloves when you spray Roundup? Yeah, I wear gloves when I spray Roundup, right? So just protect yourself. It's a cheap insurance policy for you. And, you know, there are other things besides chronic effects and delayed effects. People have allergens to these chemicals too. So especially 2,4-D, it's a pretty common one for people to have allergens. Myself even, it bothers me quite a bit. I can spray it and I'm fine, but I used to have two different bottles of 2,4-D product that I used to take around with me to do my classes like this. And it's so strong in my car, even sealed, unopened containers, that I couldn't stand to have the containers in my car anymore because it bothered me. You know, there are different allergens too that you have to be aware of that aren't necessarily on the label. So just be careful with the stuff. All right. So that the acute effects are done using what's called an LD50, which is the lethal dose that it takes to kill 50% of a test population, usually rats. We've had difficulties getting humans to volunteer for these sorts of experiments, so we have to assume that the amount of milligrams per kilogram of body weight to kill a rat is going to be about the same in humans. So if we tie that back to those signal words, danger poison, it only takes 0 to 50 milligrams per kilogram of body weight to be fatal to you if swallowed orally. Warning, it's 50 to 500 milligrams, and then caution is greater than 500 milligrams per kilogram of body weight. So if we tie that back to some things that you know and use regularly, remember that the smaller the number, the more dangerous it is, so like this yellow jacket venom, it only takes 3.5 milligrams per kilogram of body weight to be fatal to you. So it's a pretty toxic substance. Temic is an insecticide it's a pretty nasty insecticide. it's a restricted use. It's a nematicide. It controls nematodes. It's a soil injection, so you don't do it above ground. If you get a good whiff of it, you're going to be seeking medical attention. Okay, it's a nasty chemical. But if you look, we got nicotine that's right up there with them. In terms of pure nicotine, it's really quite toxic to us. Caffeine is also quite toxic. The USDA has actually been researching using caffeine to control coyotes. So, it's that toxic. Let's see. But then there, some of these other products that we're familiar with. So 2,4-D, it ranges from warning to caution. Glyphosate is the least toxic thing that I have up here. So table salt is even more toxic to you than glyphosate. Now, the bad thing about these chemicals is we can consume them, okay? So table salt, you can't sit down at the table and decide, I'm going to kill myself using table salt. You can't ingest enough of it, right? You're going to throw up. You can't consume it. The bad thing about these chemicals, not necessarily that they taste good, but you can drink them, and there have been deaths from people, transferring these chemicals into other non-labeled containers and drinking them and dying. So you really have to be careful with that in terms of exposing yourself. So the last little thing here, just to show you, this is one of my websites. Like I said, my focus in extension is more livestock marketing, so a lot of these tools you're not going to use. But there is a sprayer calibration tool on this website. So if you want to learn how to calibrate your sprayer so you're putting the right amount of chemical out, because everybody sprays differently. Some of you are dousers, some of you are spritzers, some of you walk about a normal speed. You spray differently. So if you calibrate your sprayer to how you spray, then you'll know how much chemical to be applying based on that area. So this little tool walks you through it, does some of the math for you. There's also on the fact sheets, there's a sprayer calibration fact sheet that walks you through the whole process too. It takes you about 10 minutes. It's pretty easy because you measure out 128th of an acre and there's 128 ounces in a gallon. So it converts automatically ounces to gallons per acre. And gallons per acre is what you find on the label most of the time. So it's a really easy tool to be able to calibrate your sprayers and do it right. Truthfully, if you're buying pre-mixed chemical that's in the spray bottles that's already got the water in it, you're paying a lot of money for water and convenience. So, it's okay. That might work for some of you. But if you're willing to mix it in your tanks and spray out, whether it's a gallon tank or a 5-gallon backpack tank, you'll save a lot of money on your product buying it before it's mixed. So.